you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I was at the Medina County Auditor's office the other day, and I was talking to a woman in front of me, and the woman helping another customer looked up and she said, "I've seen your picture." Now, you don't say that to a guy from Youngstown, Ohio, "I've seen your picture," because I felt I was probably down on the first floor on a poster. And she said, "No, it was on the library's email that went out. They had my picture on the library's email," and she remembered it from the picture, which I thought was kind of cool. That well, it was a sigh of relief that I had because I'm used to the other. Welcome. How many of you were here in June when I was here? We have a few that were here in June. I tell stories, and I told a bunch of them in June. And what I realized is that the stories I told in June weren't from the book that I was talking about, which is my first book, A Storyteller's Guide to a Graceful. I had just finished writing the second book. It was being edited, it was being proofread, we had all this stuff, and all these stories are floating around in my mind, and so I shared a lot of them. So tonight, I am going to share all different stories, but I have to do a couple over again just to kind of set the stages, right? And so we're going to do all new things. And because it's a new talk, I have notes. Usually I don't have notes. I just speak from my heart, and that's how I get in trouble, because then I never remember what I talked about. So I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're going to be talking about my new book is called A Storyteller's Guide to Joyful Service, Turning Your Misery into Ministry. And we're going to talk a lot about that. My last couple of talks I gave, I did not talk about the books at all. So this is kind of interesting, back into the book grind. I spoke to a group last Wednesday night called Steadfast Fathers. Now, this is a group of young men who have decided that they want to man up and become fathers. Many of them have pregnant girlfriends or they're first-time fathers. None of them had a father figure in their life, none of them. And so they're saying, teach me to be a steadfast father. So it was a terrific group of guys. We had about 10 guys. And they were sitting in a semicircle, and I was in front of them, but I was sitting as well because my lovely wife, Diane, back here, she asked me if I wouldn't mind moving this 2,000-pound dresser because she had a new lamp she wanted to plug in, and the plug was behind it. And so I went to move it, the knee went pop, and you know how the rest of it is. So I had to sit that night. But as I'm sitting there, a little boy, I would say between 1.5 years and 2 years old, with a tight little afro hairdo and a great big pacifier in his mouth, walked over, climbed up on my lap, put his head in my chest, and fell asleep during my talk. Now, I have put a lot of people to sleep during a talk, but not one that I've held. And I thought it was just such a wonderful, miraculous thing to have a 1.5 year, 2-year-old child sleeping in my chest while I was talking to a group about being fathers. It's something we talk about a lot in jail. I do jail ministry. I've been doing it for 14 years. And most of the guys that we come up against have no father figure. Most of the women that we talk to, the only men in their lives are the men that have taken advantage of them and used them in some way to get drugs or for sex or whatever. And so they don't have these father figures in their lives. And to go there and to be that father figure sometimes is just a wonderful thing. So I have, my book came out about a month ago, my second book, and we found out that same night that it was number 23 on the inspirational bestseller list, and which was just blew my mind, because I'm up there with the number one book right now is Tim Tebow. You know, he's an inspirational book. And then Max Lucado, anybody read Max Lucado? Oh gosh, he had about half a dozen of them. And Joyce Meyer had one on there. And Joel Osteen, that's the crowd that I'm running with that list. 2 weeks later, my first book made it to number 13 on the inspirational bestseller list on the tail end of that. So I told my wife, I said, now, when you introduce me to your friends, what you should say is, I'd like to introduce you to my husband, best-selling author, Tony. Hello, Susan. And she gave me the look. Now, how many guys here that have had the look? You know what the look is? I got the look. It's like, no way, Jose, am I ever going to introduce you that way. And so they're both on the inspirational bestseller list. So the book's titled Turning Your Misery into Ministry. Now think about that for a minute. The couple with an autistic child is usually the couple raising money for autism. The woman visiting a cancer patient is usually a cancer survivor. The guy giving a homeless man a pair of boots on the bridge was once homeless himself. The family that brings a meal to another family at the holidays had that happen to them, and they're paying it forward. Isn't that what happens when we allow God to work with us? We can take the worst possible things that have happened in our lives and turn them into an ability to help others. We've been there, done that. And so for those of us that are cancer survivors or have kids with certain illnesses, or we've lost a loved one, a spouse, a child, and so forth, it gives us the opportunity then to turn that misery into ministry. In Corinthians, the Lord promises us that He is faithful and that He's not going to tax us beyond our means and that He's going to give us a way out. Those words ring true to homeless people. I remember at a homeless Bible study I did, and I talked about that piece of scripture, and they all repeated it to me from memory. Because when you're living on the street, it's important to know that the Lord is faithful, that He'll get you through it. And on the other side, He gives you the opportunity to turn misery into ministry. It gives us an opportunity to have a life of predictable miracles. Predictable miracles. I have miracles happen to me all the time. Almost daily, a miracle happens. Now, it depends on what you define as a miracle. We have to understand that. You know, we just had the recent hurricane and flooding, and there's a story about the guy, and the neighborhood is flooding after the hurricane, and a bus pulls up and say, "Come on, we're evacuating." And he goes, "No, God's going to do a miracle." And then the next thing you know, the water's up to his windows. And a boat pulls up. And it says, "Come on, we'll help you evacuate." And he said, "No, I won't go with you. God is going to perform a miracle." And now he's standing on the roof of his house. The water's up to the top of his roof, and a helicopter comes. And they say, "Come on, we'll help you, bring you to safety." And he goes, "No, God is going to perform a miracle." And what happens? He dies. And he goes to heaven, and he says to God, "I was expecting a miracle." And God said, "I sent you a bus, I sent you a boat, I sent you a helicopter. You had 3 chances for a miracle." So it's how we define the word miracle. I had an older friend of mine who was in the hospital last week. Beautiful, wonderful, faithful man, almost 90. And they told him he needed a pacemaker because his heart rate was about 30, needs to be about 60, and he had blockages in the veins going from the back of his head going to his brain, 80% blockages. So the heart rate isn't pumping enough to get and he's always tired and whatever. And they said he needed to do this. And you know what he said to me? I went up to visit him. First of all, I couldn't find him. It wasn't in his room. I asked the nurse. She had no clue where he was at. And then I finally found him down the hall, and he's talking to one of the other patient's sons about miracles. And he goes, "Oh yeah, your mom's going to have a miracle. She'll be out of here. I'm having a miracle. We're all getting miracles." And I said, "You know, sometimes a pacemaker's pretty much a miracle, right?" Stents that will open up your blockage, that's kind of a miracle too, right? And you talking to the man down the hall, you might be a miracle to him. Just listening to you. You have to understand what is a miracle. And so I was trying to talk him into it. Have the surgery. Talk him into it. And I told him this story. There's a Baptist preacher. His name is Tony Campolo. And he was asked to speak in New Hampshire. And he said he would. And the guy asked him on the phone, he says, now, when you speak, after you're done speaking, do you lay hands on people and pray for healing? And he says, no, I usually don't do that. I usually just give a talk. And they said, would you mind doing it? And he said, okay. So he did. He goes to New Hampshire. He does his talk. Guy's a magnificent speaker. When he's done, he invites anybody to come up, and he's going to pray over them. And about 6 or 7 people came up, and he prayed over them. A month later, a woman calls him on the phone, and he's sitting at his desk, and she says, Tony, I don't know if you remember me, but I brought my husband up in New Hampshire when you gave your talk, and you prayed for him. You prayed for him. Now, what's he think? Guy's healed. And he says, well, how is your husband? And she said, he's dead, but he was healed. He wasn't cured, but he was healed. She said, the last month I've had with him was the best month we've had together in years. His attitude changed. He was more relaxed. He was more open. He reconciled with his brother who he hadn't talked to in 10 years. He was fun to be around. He spent time with his grandchildren. He wasn't cured, but he was healed. So I shared that story with my friend. Needless to say, the next day he had a pacemaker put in. 2 days later he had the stents put in. I saw him at breakfast the other day. He looks like he's 20 years younger. I said, boy, that's a miracle. So we can have a life of miracles if we're open to it. And the way we open ourselves to it is, and the way I do, is this simple little prayer that I pray every morning. And the prayer is this: Lord, make me an instrument. Put somebody in my path today that you can help through me. And I'll just get out of the way, put my antenna up, and you just put somebody in my path that I can help. And I learned that from a guy named Anthony DiStefano. He wrote a book called 10 Prayers God Always Says Yes To. I like that name of that book. He always says yes to them. And that's one of them. And Tony says in his book, don't pray that prayer unless you mean it, because it happens every time, and I can attest to it. I've been praying that prayer since 2012. And it happens every day. Now, it could be simple. See, simple miracle. It could be just smiling at someone and making their day, saying hello to someone. It could be anything. You know, Diane and I talk often about how people have stories to tell. We're sitting in Bob Evans one day having breakfast, and I look across, and across from us in the booth is a couple, and he looks like he's having chemotherapy. He's, hair missing, little ashen complexion, and his wife. And I smiled at both of them. Diane smiled at both of them, and that was it. We finished or continued to eat our breakfast. They were done before us. They got up. The woman came over and spent 15 minutes telling us her story and her husband's story, and it was wonderful how he had been diagnosed and how they were hoping for a cure and so forth. You see, how did they come to me and Diane? Simply by being open to that. By being open to that. So that's how it begins. Let me go to my notes here. So this book is called A Storyteller's Guide to Joyful Service. And I always have to tell people that there's a difference between happiness and joy. Do you understand that there's a huge difference? The Browns won 2 weeks ago. I was happy. They lost. I was sad. Ohio State played like crap Saturday. I was unhappy. The week before, I was happy. Happy and sad are things that come and go. Joy is something from within. Joy is something we work on through our lives. Joy comes from God. I've seen people on their deathbed be joyous. Be joyous and positive and have a positive attitude. Why? Because they knew what joy was and the grace that came from joy. So joyful service is what we're talking about. Doing service in joy. One particular night, my wife was in California visiting our grandson at the time, Nico. We have 2 grandsons, Nico and Luca. Love them, love of our lives. And I was home by myself, so I decided I was going to go out to dinner at some wine bar over there in West Akron. And as I'm on Market Street, a car hits a kid on a motorcycle, throws him off the cycle. He's been up underneath the motorcycle, and the car just goes off. And then cars are just going around him. So I pull off into the furniture store there, and I rush to him, and as I'm rushing to him, a girl in a real funky outfit with purple hair grabbed him and drug him to safety on the Devil's Strip. And as I tried to attend to his wound, his hand was mangled, and I tried to tend to it. Another woman had called the ambulance. This girl with purple hair talked to him. She calmed him. She made him feel like he was important. She did all of these things to help him. And then the paramedics came and they took him, and I had a chance to talk with the girl in purple hair. And I said to you, I was really impressed with what you did. And she says, I understand what it's like to have people ignore you. I understand what it's like for people to treat you differently because of a tattoo or a purple hair. I wrote that story that year, and it went viral on the internet. And I received literally hundreds of emails and messages and pictures of girls with purple hair. I like girls with purple hair. I like the goth chicks, the ones that aren't the cheerleaders, the ones that are not in the right group. You know why? Because if you're laying in the middle of the street suffering, they'll be the first to help you. I ended my little talk, or my little story I wrote, with this from that girl. The loneliest people are the kindest. The saddest people are the brightest. The most damaged people are the wisest. All because they do not wish to see anyone else suffer the way that they do. You go to any shelter, you know what you're going to find there? Girls with purple hair. You go to any food bank, you know what you're going to find there working? Girls with purple hair. I did Project Homeless Connect for a number of years down in Stark County. I did it both in Summit and Stark County, but in Stark County. And I worked with so many girls with purple hair who have been there and who understand suffering and don't want others to suffer as they did. You know, hard times happens to everybody. How many of you have had hard times? Let me ask it differently. How many of you haven't? You will. You will. Hard times happen to everybody. There's a death in the family. There's a job loss. There's an illness or a diagnosis. There's an accident. It happens to all of us. All of us are going to have hard times. All of us. But the Lord promises us that it won't be more than we can handle, and that He'll help us get through it. And when we do, we can turn that misery into ministry. There's two things that happen in hard times. You can either get bitter or you can get better. Have you ever met those people that are bitter? The woman that got divorced in 1973, she's still the only thing she talks about. The person that lost their husband and just can't move on. You could either get bitter or you could get better. And gratitude and forgiveness are the two keys that get us there. Anger and resentment don't get us there. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Anger and resentment are like a banquet and you're the entree. It's eating you, not them. That person probably doesn't even think about it anymore. We have to forgive. We have to learn to forgive. In my jail ministry, we use this thing called the forgiveness prayer. People come in angry and resentful, and we read the forgiveness prayer. And I give them a copy of it and say, read it every day for a week. And a week later, when I go back, they're changed. We could either be bitter or we can get better. And what they've chose to do is to get better. God does not promise us a pain-free life, but promises us strength for the day, comfort for the tears, and a light for the way. There's the old saying, God brings you to it, he'll get you through it. And that's true. There's a story in the Bible about Lazarus. You know, Lazarus dies. Lazarus was Jesus' best friend. They were pals, hung together. Lazarus had two sisters, Martha and Mary. Remember all the stories about Martha and Mary? You know, where Martha, she kind of hung out at Jesus' feet, and Mary was cleaning the house and making dinner. My mom said, you know, Jesus was single because he got the wrong one there. The one that was cooking should be. But this particular story, Lazarus dies as they're waiting for Jesus to come. And finally Jesus comes and Mary runs out and says to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would be alive. And the shortest sentence in the Bible is the next one. You know what it is? Jesus wept. He cried. Fully human, fully divine, cried. And then as he got closer to the house, Martha, Lord, if you'd have been here, my brother would be alive. Now Jesus knew he was going to bring him back. And so they go out, and he has the men move the rock. And he says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus comes out. And then he tells the men, unwrap him, untie him, and set him free. A couple of summers ago, we were in Naples in March. We spend a lot of time. Am I touching this microphone and blowing your ears out? I'm sorry. I have hands everywhere. And we spend March in sunny Naples, and we're at the pool, and there's a woman next door. She was probably in her early 50s. And we saw her several times, and and I struck up a conversation with her. And she began to tell me that this was the first time that she had been away from Massachusetts. She was from Boston. And she was by herself. Her husband was still up in Boston. And it was the first time that she had been away from Boston since her husband died, or since her son, 22-year-old son, died of a heroin overdose. And she just couldn't let it go. And she kept getting bitter and bitter and bitter. And so as we talked, I shared that story with her. As she was saying, God, if you'd have been here, my son would still be alive. No. And I told her that when Jesus asked them to untie him and set him free, that's what he's asking of her too. To untie him from the bitterness that you feel and let him go free. From your loving arms to the loving arms of our Savior. Before we left, she was in an upbeat mood. Her husband was coming. And she understood that she couldn't continue to cling to it. In jail ministry 14 years ago, most of the people that we saw were there on DUIs and marijuana charges. Today, Canada legalized marijuana. If you're over 18, you can have all you want, up to 30 grams or something like that. Imagine how many trucks are on their way to Canada right now, but now, about 80% of the people we see in jail are heroin addicts. They're addicted to heroin. Now close your eyes and think of a heroin addict when you were younger. What'd you think of? You thought there's some degenerate laying in a street corner, no. They're your sons and daughters. They're the woman down the street. They're housewives and construction workers. They're everyday people, just like you and me. They're good people who have made a bad choice along the way. The heavy equipment operator who hurts his back, goes to the doctor and is scripted for Oxycontin. 1 pill every morning and he can go to work 5 days a week. He can earn a living, bring home a paycheck, support his wife and kids until the script runs out. And then he tries to buy Oxycontin on the street and it's too expensive. It's $50, $75, $100 a tab. He needs 5 a week, And so somebody suggests he try heroin. And the next thing you know, he's in jail on a heroin charge. A guy just trying to support his family. There was a girl, some of you have heard this story, named Buffy. And Buffy, I met in jail. Buffy was a heroin addict. And when I first met her, she looked like crap. Eyes were sunken, skin was ashen, hair was messed up, clothes were disheveled. She was a mess. And every time I saw Buffy and every time we talked, for 10 months, she looked a little better. Her eyes cleared, her complexion cleared. She was taking better care of herself, combing her hair, brushing her teeth. And she was dressing as best she could in an orange jumpsuit. She was a very attractive young girl, probably in her mid-30s. And there was just something about Buffy that she and I clicked. And after about 9 or 10 months together, she told me that she would be leaving, that she was being released, and she had absolutely nowhere to go. I said, we have to find you a halfway house. We have to find you a bed. And then the warden, or not the warden, but the chaplain, and many other people tried to find her a bed. At that time, there were 6 recovery beds for women in Medina County. 6. And there are 62 animal shelters in Medina County. You're safer if you're a dog than if you're an addicted woman. And now, several years later, there are 11 beds. And we just opened up a new heroin clinic at the hospital here in Wadsworth. And it's men only. Buffy. Did I fail her? Did the courts fail her? Did the jail fail her? Did society fail her? Would she be alive today? Lord, if you'd have been there, Buffy would still be alive today. We have to do a better job of that. I mentioned that we sometimes with a kind word or a hello or a smile can have an effect on people's lives. Sometimes a single word or a single piece of encouragement will stick with somebody forever. It's nothing, cost absolutely zero to be kind. Costs nothing to be kind. One word of discouragement might turn a person completely off for their dream. But one encouraging word might have them going and seeking their dream and finding their dream and bringing their dream to life. The woman who lost her husband in a car accident gets a $500 check in the mail and it helps her with the mortgage that month. Who does that? Who does that? The unemployed parent that can't afford Christmas parents gets a knock on the door Christmas morning with toys for their kids from a neighbor down the street. Who does that? Those acts of kindness are never forgotten. The waitress, wondering how she'd get the money for her family's next meal, until a guy leaves her a $100 tip. And she has the money to do that. Who does that? Beautiful people do that. Beautiful people do that. Those acts of kindness are never forgotten. Every one of us can remember some time in our life when somebody gave an act of kindness to us, that encouraged us, that gave us the ability to dream and to hope. Those are the beautiful people. You know, beautiful people don't just happen. We think of beauty in this culture as the beauty of Hollywood, of the model or the actor or the actress. We think of beauty in that way, the cosmetic way, the fashion way. That's how we think of beauty. Let me tell you, some of the most beautiful people I've ever met have been people that have shown kindnesses beyond what they ever could do. I want to read a quote from a person whose name you might know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Anybody know Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? Are you familiar with her? She wrote a book called On Death and Dying. It was a #1 bestseller back in the 70s. Here's what she says. The most beautiful people we have known are those that have known defeat, have known suffering, have known struggle, have known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion and gentleness and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people don't just happen. Beautiful people don't just happen. There's a beauty that comes from loss and failure. Sometimes those people are misjudged. You're misjudged as being too happy. Pollyanna. Oh, she's just always happy. There's got to be something wrong with her. No, there's nothing wrong with her. There's nothing wrong with her. Behind those smiles are hardships and losses and horror stories that we might not ever begin to understand. They've been through pain that we would never know. They've been through pain we would never know. But they smile, and they take that pain and they turn it into a mission. And they turn that mission into a ministry. You all remember somebody in your life, don't you? That one person that encouraged you? The coach, the nurse, the college roommate, the coworker that just mentored you and helped you along. We all have those, right? Those are beautiful people. We need to celebrate those people. We need to be those people. We all have scars, all of us. I remember one day I was looking in the mirror. I got out of the shower. I was getting ready to shave. I looked in the mirror and I saw this scar that goes from here to here, where 2 feet of my colon were removed for cancer. An ugly scar. And 14 years later, I'm cancer-free by the grace of God. That scar is not ugly. That scar is a been there, done that. That scar gives me the right to talk to others who are facing similar surgeries. That scar gives me the ability to do that. Now, some of us have physical scars like that. And some of us have invisible scars, mental scars, depression, anxiety, mental illnesses. And some have a variety of other scars, scars that came from a car accident or a surgery. Scars, we all have them. but even with our scars, we can be one of those people. And that's the challenge that I want to leave you with. That's the challenge of my book, The Storyteller's Guide to Joyful Service, Turning Misery into Ministry. The challenge is that it only takes one person to change a life. And you can be that person. You can be that encouraging person. You can be the person that sets someone on a course to success. They say 1,000 matches come from one tree, but it only takes one match to burn down a whole forest. Don't be the negative person in someone's life. Offer them hope. Offer them joy. Offer them God's grace. Lord, make me an instrument. Put somebody in front of me today that you can help through me, and then do it. God bless you. I thought we'd do a little something different. We didn't take any Q&A last time, and we didn't share other stories. Now, since I spoke at the Wadsworth Library, now, first of all, you have to understand, me at a library, the only thing that ever happened to me in a library is I'd get shushed. Shushed. While I was going through the Dewey Decimal System and the microfiche from something, some class assignment that I messed up. Did anything that I talk about cause you to think about something in your own life, a story in your own? It did? Come on. Share one.
Lots. Oh, there's so many of them.
Just give us one.
Well, the story about Lazarus and the unwrapping and the messages. I really like this part about to the person who is grieving, to let that person be free and go. Free to go on to salvation and go on, and to take that clinging, confining, wrapping away.
It's confining, isn't it? When you continue to wear that,
And then I have I'll have to. I have it in my car, but I'll bring it. I had written a poem about after the death of my husband. It's probably not tremendously original, because I've read the theme. I've seen the theme in other people's writing, and I didn't even I didn't get it from somebody else. But then I said, but it was called "Let Go," and it was about having a broken heart. But the more that you cling to this brokenness, it's broken like shards of glass, and that the more you cling to that broken heart, the more you re-injure yourself. And only God can make it.
That's a great analogy.
That if you hold it close and don't let it go, then you're constantly cutting yourself again on that pain. If you can let it go, then you can allow God to.
Oh man, that's beautiful, beautiful analogy. Beautiful.
But it took me a long time to get there, to get to, and I can't say that I always, lived it, but it did occur to me. I'd like to share that.
I would love to see it. A writer, a writer. We got writers in the room. Better writers than me. You talk about encouraging words. I think I told this story the last time I was here. When I was a freshman in college, I did my first English paper, and it came back with more red ink than black. And there was a note from the professor that said, "You'll never write above a 5th grade level, ever, in your life, write above a 5th grade." Now, when you say that to a guy with a 1.9 GPA, I did take basket weaving in 2 gym classes to get it up to a 2, but it discouraged me from writing. It discouraged me from writing. And I've always been a storyteller, and people have told me all my life, write them down so they'll be there for your grandkids to read, and so forth. And I was afraid to do it.
What got you, was there something that, can you pinpoint a time when you stopped being afraid to write? And how did you get over that hurdle?
That's a fabulous question. I knew I was going to have grandkids. And I wanted my grandkids to know that Grandma and Grandpa were disciples of Jesus Christ, that we followed the Lord, and that that was a very important part of our lives. And so I had to write these stories down. I had to. It was not that I wanted to, that I had to. And I remember I wrote about a half a dozen stories. The first one I wrote was called When My Children Have Lost the Faith. And it's about the majority of people in America now. Over 51% of the people under the age of 30, when asked what their religious affiliation is, say none. 51% say none. And that's sad and it's scary. And we live in a society today where we can't express our faith, our feelings. It should be private. Keep it to yourself. Shouldn't be in the public. How can I keep this stuff private? How can I not share it? There's a thing called the Great Commission. We talked about it Sunday night when I gave a talk. The Great Commission is go and make disciples of all nations. How can I make disciples if I don't talk about it? And so I've decided I'm going to talk about it. And in a month or two, I'm going to say Merry Christmas. Not Happy Holidays, Merry Christmas. And when you sneeze, and my wife's been sneezing a lot, she's got a cold, I say, God bless you. Not Gesundheit or God bless you. That's my way of getting back. And so I wrote a half dozen stories. The one was called When My Children Lost the Faith. And that story has been the most copied and placed in church bulletins. You know, church bulletins that they hand out when you leave. It's been in 400 different churches in the United States as bulletin. Catholic, Protestant, Methodist, Baptist, doesn't matter, Christian churches. Because it's the one problem that we all face and don't talk about. And our children have quit, not kids' children, our adult children have quit going to church, have quit building a spirituality base, a moral compass that helps them. Instead, they get their moral compass from, Hollywood. No. And so I wrote these things. I wrote about a half a dozen of them, and I gave them to a college professor, a retired college professor friend of mine. And I said, would you read these? And she said, sure. And she read them. And I said, what'd you think? She says, oh, they're marvelous stories. I said, that's not the important thing. The important thing is, what level do I write at? And she said, about 6th grade. I said, well, hell, I'm up a grade. In 42 years, I'm up a grade. And so I've had reviewers go, this is a real easy book to read. Well, no kidding. You have to be in 6th grade. I plowed through that book in an hour and a half. It was simple. Thank you. And then a good buddy of mine, Jim Carney, used to write for the Beacon Journal, who's retired. He says, that's what you're taught in journalism school, to write at a 6th grade level. Because that's how people read. And so you want to be popular, have them read it. If you want to be have your wife introduce you as, best-selling author, you have to do that. You have to write at that level. And so once I got that confirmation, I started writing every single Saturday morning. I'd get up, put on a pot of coffee, bring my wife a cup of coffee. Just show you what kind of guy I am. Of course, she had to get the refills and make breakfast and but I started out with the first cup of coffee, and I would go to my office and I would sit down and I would write a story, usually about 750 words, usually based in Scripture, and at the end with a few questions to ask yourself. And those stories became part of my blog. My blog is called Finding God's Grace in Everyday Life. It was named in March one of the top 100 Catholic blogs in the world. And it was the runner-up for the 2015 Web Blog Awards in the category of spirituality. And so we began to pull those things together. I've written about 300 and plus stories. So each of my book is basically a series of stories. And you can read them in about 5 minutes, each story. Matter of fact, one guy who was here with the Methodist group, he was the Methodist men's group, he said, perfect bathroom book. Like one story per trip. 72 stories, I'm done in a couple of months. Just keep it on the toilet. Hey, I'm up the story and everything. So the stories each have a piece of Scripture. As a matter of fact, there's Girls with Purple Hair. And it has a piece of Scripture, and it has a story, and then at the end, it has some questions to ask yourself. And so it's a good book for reflection. A lot of people read it in the morning when they do their little Bible reading or whatever, or they read it at night before they go to bed. One guy says, I read them at night and I let them marinate in my head throughout the day. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but he said, and it makes me feel better. And so that's what the books are. The first book is The Storyteller's Guide to a Grace-Filled Life. And there's 73 stories in this book. And this is a little more, there's some stories, for example, about the holidays. So, you know, we got the holidays coming up. Advent and Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. Can I share one holiday story with you, even though it's not? Many, many years ago, I think in 1975, my wife and I were living in Atlanta, Georgia. We moved to Atlanta, Georgia, a young couple. First time for her out of the state. First time for me out of the state, except for the time I spent in the service. And we moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and we met a lot of people. Most of the people we met were from Michigan and Pennsylvania and Ohio, and they're from Northerners that had transplanted to Atlanta. And it was getting close to Thanksgiving, and Diane said, you know, it would be great. Let's invite some couples over the house for Thanksgiving dinner, and I'll cook. My wife's a fabulous cook. That's a great idea. And so we invited 4 couples to join us for Thanksgiving. And Diane had made a turkey, and I got a free ham at my job and brought that home. We had a turkey and a ham and all the fixings and desserts and everything. The day before Thanksgiving, one of the couples called and said, my parents sent us some tickets to fly home. We're flying back to Michigan. So there was going to be 3 couples in us. And later that night, as Diane was baking pies, the phone rang again. And another couple said that they had to cancel and had to change of plans. And then Thanksgiving morning, the other 2 couples canceled as well. And so there we were, alone with a 22-pound turkey butter ball, a big ham, cheesy potatoes, a big tossed salad, green beans, almondine, desserts, and just the 2 of us. Now, the little church we went to in Atlanta, there weren't very many Catholic churches in Atlanta. As a matter of fact, we used to do a Catholic weekend for high school kids, and we had to borrow the Baptist kids in order to do it, just to get enough kids to have a team. But our little church adopted 2 Vietnamese families. That was at the tail end of the Vietnam War, and we adopted 2 Vietnamese families. And we found them housing and so forth. And Diane said, you know what we should do? Let's pack this food up and let's bring it to those 2 Vietnamese families and let's let them have a Thanksgiving U.S. style. And so she divided up the food and we loaded it into the car and we dropped it off, and there was a lot of bowing, and nobody spoke English. We didn't speak Vietnamese, and they were kind of blown away and fascinated and whatever. And at Thanksgiving, we did Happy Thanksgiving. And we went back home, and I ordered a pizza, and we had 2 Diet Cokes. And it was the best Thanksgiving I think I've ever had. You see, you can turn a misery into a ministry if you're open to it. And that's in the first book. Our Thanksgiving Pizza is the name of the story. And I'll share a Christmas story with you because I get to talk about my folks, my mom and dad. My dad was Italian Methodist. Think about that for a minute. How the heck could you be Italian and be anything other than Catholic? But he was Italian Methodist. It was a tiny little Italian Methodist church by us. And my mom was a devout Catholic. She was the one pressing all the linens and making sure everything was nice and polishing the brass candles and so forth. And this one particular Christmas, I was 5 years old, and the only thing I wanted was a Lionel train set from the 1949 Lionel train catalog. This was about 1954. And that's all I wanted. And so Christmas morning, I came down to the tree, little 5-year-old guy, and under the tree I saw a box. And I tore it open, and it was the Lionel train set that I wanted. And then I started opening other presents, and I got, the obligatory underwear, the socks, Cootie, or one of those games like that a 5-year-old would like. And then my dad said something that stuck with me to this day. He said, your best friend, his dad's laid off, hasn't worked in 6 months. There's no toys for him this Christmas. Wouldn't it be nice if you gave up one of your toys? Now, easy to give up the underwear or the Cootie or the sock. He said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about what toy would make him the happiest. And a little 5-year-old Tony thought hard. And holding back the tears, I said, my train set. And he said, that's a great idea. And as he said that, I looked behind the tree, and there was another train set. You see, he knew that the other guy was unemployed, and he knew that he was going to help him, and he knew that my little friend, Poke Chops, and I both like trains, and so he bought 2 sets. And what it was, in my dad's weird way, was a test. A test that I have found in my life that every single 5 or 6-year-old will pass. They'll all pass that test. I didn't do anything special. I did what any 5 or 6-year-old would do. I gave it up. Now, what happens between 5 and 6 and the teen years changes everything. It changes everything. God said if we want to enter the kingdom of heaven, we must be like little children. Little children are totally dependent upon their parents. You ever see a kid crying? What's he doing 2 minutes later? Giggling. They live in the moment, something we need to learn to do. See, we live in the past and it makes us depressed, or we live in the future and it makes us anxious. The only place to live is between the breaths we take, between the inhale and the exhale, in the moment. That's where we need to live. But now, we're pissed off about the past. Or we're anxious about the future. How many things have I gotten anxious about? Something's going to happen the next week, and guess what happens? Nothing. Oh, I was so worried. Oh, lost sleep, and so forth. And so that's the test that I talk about when I say that most young kids would pass it. Because they want their friend to be happy, huh? Isn't that great? Anybody else have any questions? This has been fun. I've enjoyed having you here. Let me give you a couple of little parting things here. One is, I'll speak at any church, anywhere, anytime. I've spoken to, what did we talk? We talked about First Christian Church over here. I spoke to their adult Sunday school between services, kind of wedged in there between services. We had a great group of people, magnificent group. I spoke at Grace Evangelical Lutheran, that big church right there with the beautiful church, to the Wadsworth Women's Club. What a great bunch of gals that was. They were super. My first book, when it came out, was $15.99. The fine folks at Amazon have it now at $12.99. My new book is $13.99. Tonight, they're $10 a piece, and I'll sign them to anybody you want. It saves postage, it saves all that stuff. So if you want one or both, they're $10 each. I like cash, it works better, but we do have a credit card reader if it works. The last 3 times we did it, didn't work, but I think it'll work tonight. So if you'd like a book or that. If you don't want to get a book tonight and you decide you want to get a book, go to my website. I have business cards there, TonyAgnesi.com. Click on the store, go into the store, order a book, and when you get to the checkout, in the coupon code, put FRIENDS, and it'll take 10% off the cost of the book, and you can get them there too. I don't make a penny from any book I write or any speech I give. All the money goes to the charities that you'll read about in the book. And the ones in the new book that are the Community Pregnancy Center, which is the Embrace Clinic and Care Center in Barberton, where they offer free ultrasound to girls who can't afford it, and diapers and formula and cribs and car seats and layettes and training and classes in motherhood and classes in parenting and classes in nutrition and so forth. That Steadfast Fathers group I spoke for is in that. Some of the money will go there. Some of the money will go to the Medina County Jail and our ministry, which is the Diocese of Cleveland Ministry to the Incarcerated at the Medina County Jail. Some of it will go to Catholic Radio. In January, I have a brand new show on Catholic Radio called The Storytellers. And it's not me telling stories, it's me inviting people to come tell their story. It will be out as a podcast, yes. Oh, thank you, Carol. Yes, the website's called thestorytellers.com, and that podcast site, thestorytellers.com. You can get it on your Apple iTunes or Google Play, Stitcher, Slacker, TuneIn, all of the normal places that you would get your podcast. So every podcast, Lipson, all the podcast platforms. So yeah, it's called thestorytellers.com. That'll be beginning in January. So anybody want some books, come and get them. I'll sign them. If I ask you your name, it's only because Marcia sometimes is spelled CIA and not SHA, and sometimes Carol is spelled with a K instead of a C.